Welcome back to another Overwatch League recap. Today, we have the San Francisco Shock going up against the Guangzhou Charge for the second time. On Oasis, the Shock elected to go with a standard GOATS composition on Garden, and they easily took the point and Guangzhou was forced off. A very long fight with several questionable ults ended up going in the Shock's favor. Guangzhou wasted their Transcendence early in the next fight, and Sinatra bided his time and launched out a second Graviton of the round, mopping up the Charge in one of the easiest rounds they've had this season. University featured the Charge being more aggressive, and it paid off as they ended up taking the point first. A mistake by the Charge allowed the tank line of the Shock to cap in the next fight. The Shock then slid into their groove, and the Shock didn't relinquish control for the rest of the map, giving them a Shock win 2-0. Baptiste Goats was the name of the game for the Shock on their attack round on Paris. An excellent rotation allowed the Shock to set up shop on the point with little resistance, and the ensuing scrappy fight featured the Shock finally taking the point after an astoundingly long amount of time. A snowball attempt went wrong, and the Shock ended up having to back out. The Charge then attempted to take a page out of their opponent's book and went on the offense, but an excellent Earthshatter from Super punished the Charge's risk. San Francisco then proceeded to waltz onto the point and take it with time to spare. Sinatra brought out the Sombra on defense, while the Charge went with a pretty standard dive goats. The very scrappy and dive-heavy fight somehow went in the Shock's favor. The Shock then tried some cheeky positioning, but Violet got caught out and the Charge took the point. The Charge then engaged Snowball mode, but an excellent stall by the Shock allowed San Francisco to hold the Charge off with 14% to spare. The Shock held the Charge off decently well, but the Charge eventually muscled through in overtime. Baptiste Goats was the composition of choice for the Shock again, and they ran it well. They patiently waited for the Charge to fall back before establishing themselves on the point and taking the map with relative ease in a 3-2 win. The Shock elected to run Baptiste Goats again on the Blizzard World attack. This attack was stymied very quickly, and Rascal swapped to Brigitte. The Shock got a few ticks on their next push, but they were eventually shoved back before they could cap. The Charge then got shoved off the point during the Shock's next push, and the Shock got the cart moving. The Shock then motored on through point B, as they took advantage of the passive Charge style. The Charge had a decent stall towards the end of point C, but the Shock ended up powering right through. The Shock must really like Baptiste, because they ran him again on defense. Losing Choi Hyobin's mech early didn't dissuade the Shock either, who still took the fight easily. The next push was more of the same, except it took the Shock an even shorter amount of time to fight them off. The Shock easily secured the next push, and the Shock took the map and the series in 3-0 fashion. On Watchpoint Gibraltar, Baptiste was on the menu again for the Shock, and it was business as usual for the first push, as Sinatra used one of his fast grabs to confirm the take. The Shock then managed to push most of the way through B, but some good plays by the Charge allowed them to set up shop on defense. The Charge then tried to stall the Shock's relentless offense, but the Shock, as usual, punched through. Point C was a breeze as the Shock separated the Charge and used a Graviton to lock them in their own spawn. The Shock went with a more standard Goats on the defense. The first fight was extremely drawn out, but the Shock ended up biding their time and taking the fight. The Shock then went full selfless mode and began to spawn camp the Charge. That was pretty much the end right there, and the Shock took the map very easily in a 3-0 fashion. There isn't much to say here that hasn't already been said. The Charge are in a huge slump right now, while the Shock are absolutely fantastic. We will have to see how these two trends continue in the coming weeks.